everyone for joining us. I'm excited for this talk. It's about a topic that I think most of us here are rather passionate about and maybe a little bit overzealous about, and I think that's a good thing. So the topic is women in D&D and specifically representation of women. So we have a fantastic women in the panel that I'm excited to speak to. Some I've spoken to before on this very topic and some for the first time. So my name is Safia, and we have with us Isa, Yasmin, and Kirsten. And before we jump in, if everyone can have a round of introductions.
Start with you. Start with you.
Yeah, start with you. That's good.
All right. Okay. Well, my name is Safia Aldulaijan. I'm Saudi, based in Khobar, and I got into D&D not very long ago, about 2 years ago. But through that, I started a community that has about 60 plus members, and it started out as an all-female community, which is why I really like this topic. I'm also a writer, but I work in a corporate job by day and write all the rest of the time, or DM. And I've always been a major fantasy fiction nerd, as I think many of the people in this hobby are. And I'm happy to talk about this today.
Woo. Go ahead, Isa.
Hi, I'm Isa. I go by Evil Clever Dog on Twitter and Instagram and YouTube. I'm also, I guess, relatively new to D&D and tabletop gaming. I've been playing, I would say, regularly since March last year, and had like numerous false starts throughout the years before then. But then I just got consumed whole by it. And I stream TTRPGs. I'm currently streaming a Quest game every Monday on Chromatic Chimera, and have a few other things in the works coming up. And yeah, this is definitely a topic I'm really passionate about, because those false starts I mentioned were often to do with racial and gender biases and stuff like that. So yeah, definitely a topic I'm very interested in chatting with you all about today. And yeah, I'm excited.
Go ahead, Kirsten. We'll do it alphabetically.
Oh, okay. You can see the teacher in there. I'm Kirsten. I am also a teacher, actually. I'm here in Bahrain right now, although I have been gaming basically since I was like 11 or 12. So that is a long time now. So we'll say around 20 years. And I played so many games under the sun. Actually, D&D I got into quite late. I was playing Vampire and Werewolf in the 90s when it was edgy and cool. Yeah, I've tried a little bit of everything. And Nasser, who's here today, likes to introduce me as the first female DM in Bahrain. I don't think that's true, but it was in the newspaper, so it must be. And I've really enjoyed being part of the. Yeah, okay, Nasser. I've really enjoyed being part of the. I think the community here is growing quite rapidly, and it's really fun to have gotten to know Safia and the people in other parts of the Gulf where I haven't had a chance to visit because of COVID. Oh. But soon. So I'm having a great time, and I'm so happy to be here as well.
Hi everyone, I am Yasmin. I am a sometimes DM, but I am a hardcore player. So that is where my passion lies, first and foremost. I've been playing now for almost 3 years. I am a teacher by day and angry mother by night. So, so I'm sure all that passion, rage, and all sorts will be coming out during this panel. But no, I was introduced to D&D, well, many years ago, because I was part of the kind of old school online kind of role playing through Yahoo chat, by the way. That's how old I am. And we used to write posts back and forth, and but it wasn't D&D. It was just kind of like this almost homebrew kind of situation that was going on. And then I kind of didn't come back to any sort of table for many years, moved to Bahrain, happened to be at book club and could see this group of boys in the corner playing D&D, and I was like, I know what they're doing and I really want to play. And luckily, I happened to stop one of them, said, you know, I'm so jealous of you. I wish I could play D&D as well. And this guy said, let me organize something for you. And he actually arranged and introduced me, and I still play with him to this day. So yeah, come back to that later. Thank you for giving us time to introduce ourselves, Safia.
Yeah, and thank you everyone for those great introductions. So before we really get into the topic of how women are represented within gaming in general, as well as tabletop roleplay, I do want to ask everyone, what was your first impression of tabletop gaming, whether it was D&D or any other game? And in general, and then if you want, you could narrow it down specifically to your experience of it as a woman or a girl if you were much younger.
I'll start then.
Okay, go ahead. Yasmin. No, right, please, fine. You go ahead.
Okay, so I was a girl. I was in middle school, and the guy I had a crush on was gonna run D&D for us. So of course I was in, right? And I had no idea what it was. And it was basically, we ended up doing a dungeon crawl. I don't know where we got it from, but he made us make our own map. And all I remember from that game is we killed a wolf and we found treasure when we cut the wolf open, because that's what really old school D&D was like. Like, you have to have treasure, the players will leave. So all we managed to do was kill a wolf, but there had to be treasure because otherwise we wouldn't keep playing. But all I remember is making our own map with a piece of graph paper and killing that wolf. I have no idea. And so I never really played D&D again for some reason until I was in college. But I was like Yasmin, I was doing a lot of text-based stuff after that. But that was my first impression of D&D was, why was there treasure in this wolf?
Yada. For me, it was a bit different, you see, because of course I was text-based from when I was about maybe 12, 13. So I didn't really know what D&D was. But in Cambridge, we have a massive Warhammer shop. And you'd go past that. I used to go past it on the bus all the time because it's in the town centre. And there would just be a bunch of guys stood around these big tables, like square tables, doing whatever they did. But I never, ever, ever saw a woman in there. Ever. I don't know if even women worked in there. So for me, it seemed kind of a bit more of a boys' club. And I'm just one of these people where if there's just loads and loads and loads of men somewhere, I don't want to be the only woman. I don't mind being one of 4 or 5, but I don't want to be the only woman kind of standing there, or I didn't want to be at that age anyway. I think I'm a bit braver and obstinate now, I think, actually. So, yeah, so for me, it was very much like, this is D&D is a bit of a boys' club. TTRPG is what it is. Tabletop gaming is a bit of a boys' club. And yeah, I like that I was proven wrong later on in life. What about you, Izza?
Yeah, so my first ever experiences of playing D&D were quite bad. I think the first time I ever tried to play, I was like 12 and found it to be, I didn't have the language to express this at the time because I didn't know that was what was going on, but looking back on it, I can see that there was a lot of like gatekeeping behavior and prescriptive behavior about like presumptions about what certain people can and can't play and do. And me being me, someone who my whole life has been, you know, drawing and creating characters and doing cosplay and stuff, I just wanted to make something weird that I really enjoyed and found that people didn't respond well to that. And so just kind of, got this impression that it was very much a kind of community where it was very sort of gatekeepery, male-oriented, white male-oriented. And even though I was into video games and stuff, which is also a community where you can very much get that impression and very much be sort of persecuted for being a woman or being non-white and stuff like that, just sort of like felt like I should stay away from it. And then a few years ago, some friends of mine started working in board game cafes and stuff like that. And then my group of friends here started getting into tabletop gaming. And so that was when I sort of reintroduced myself to trying to play D&D. We had a few tragically short-lived campaigns. And then, like I said, last year sort of finally started getting some campaigns that had longevity to them that I could finally like sink my teeth into. And I do definitely think that from where I started, I can see an improvement, but there's still definitely many more improvements to be made. And there's still sort of issues surrounding gender and other sort of marginalized groups.
Yeah. And I do find that interesting that even across different locations of upbringing or different cultures, it always felt like gaming or tabletop roleplay in general had this masculine culture to it, even though if you just take it as it is, there's nothing inherently masculine about it. There's nothing really gendered about it to begin with. But that happened for really a number of reasons. It could just be marketing. It could be really a variety of things.
What about
in my
you,
case?
Sam?
Yeah, what about you?
Don't worry, I'm getting there. I'm running away from the
You're not getting out of it.
Not at all, don't worry. I'll answer everything I ask. So in my case, I always liked the concept of Dungeons and Dragons, and I got into role play in a different way that I didn't understand translated into Dungeons and Dragons either. So similarly to Yasmin, and I believe Kirsten, you've also held these games where it was a text-based role play chat, and to me it was a different way to exercise writing. And I got into that at around, I think it was 12. So that was how I got into the world of role play. But as for Dungeons and Dragons, it wasn't until just over 2 years ago, almost 3 years ago actually. A friend of mine decided, hey, I'm going to be DMing Lost Mines of Pandelver, come join the game. And I did. And that campaign didn't live very long, but it gave me enough of a curiosity to jump in and then DM. Because I couldn't find any other games to join. So I'm like, okay, well, I'm gonna DM. And I ended up DMing for her and a couple of other friends. And I really wanted to have more people or find more people that would be interested in playing. So I tried to reach out to any local communities to see if they exist. I found one, and it was on this application meetups, and they had like an application you fill in, and I did, and I wrote all about all the books I've read and all the video games I've played and all of these things. They responded back saying, I'm sorry, we're only interested in serious gamers. And I paused and I looked at the list of all the people there, and they were all men. And here's the thing, if they had just said we're an all-male group, I would have respected that, just like how I later on as Vengeance made an all-female community. So I ended up having about 30 or so women, all of them gamers of different interests, from serious to not so serious, and it was just welcoming for everyone to come in and play. And then we opened up to have men as well, and now we're around some 60 plus. Unfortunately not as active as I'd like, but we're getting there. And so that was in not so brief my introduction to Dungeons and Dragons and DMing. And on the topic of that perception of it being masculine, I did want to look at what was the evolution of the representation of women. And as I read in from a couple of sources, I did find that in the original 70s version, they really used mainly masculine references of only referring to characters as he, or different classes as he, and fighter was called the fighting man. And then when first edition came in, female characters were built in to have a lower strength score and a bit of a different variation of charisma. By second edition, these mechanical differences were removed, and then the only things that they detailed was height and weight differences, which is fine. By D&D third edition, the core classes such as rogue and barbarian, fighter, ranger were referenced as male, while a couple of other classes were referenced as female by she. such as druid, monk, and paladin. I'm not sure why that was the case, and I'd actually be curious to know. But by 4th edition, this was gone, and they started using he and she rather interchangeably. And by 5th edition, they did add a statement stating you can play a male or female character without gaining any special benefits or hindrances. Which, you know, if you were to read it now, like if you were to just find that in 5th edition in the player's handbook, you'd feel, why do you need to state it? Why do you need to even mention it? But looking back at the history and where it came from, it starts to make sense. Like that statement was more of a declaration that this whole game is going in a different direction, that is being more open to women representation. And one interesting thing I read is that as of 2018, women now make up about 40% of the D&D community. Yeah. While before it was around 25% back in 2012. So this statistic is most likely coming from the US, I'd imagine. So I couldn't find exact references. So I'd be curious to know how it is in the rest of the world. But a big jump about this is mainly due to streaming and seeing women play. And that's a big part of representation. And another thing that I found, at least a positive note, is that the player's handbook credits women as contributors more than previous editions. About a quarter of the contributors are female, and also about 75% of the branding and marketing team is female. So that does highlight that there's been huge improvements. But with that in mind, I think it's also good to talk about, okay, what next and what can we do as consumers of this, as players and as DMs and as community leaders or as streamers and so on. So the first question would be, what can you as a player feel like you can do to improve the inclusivity of D&D with women?
I think an important thing, and you've touched on it, is creating an environment where women feel welcome in the first place. Yeah. And as you've noted, a big part of the upsurge in women and people of marginalized genders getting into D&D and tabletop gaming is that they're seeing people like themselves playing on streams, and sort of the artwork in the books is more inclusive than it used to be, and the women that are there are not as sexualized as they used to be. So there's maybe more of a feeling of, I can play this without feeling like I'm constantly going to be hit on and sexualized and stuff like that. But then it also, that's some sort of very surface level obvious stuff, I think. But then also, if you're talking about maybe like someone's own personal table or stream, something important would be stuff like the gender ratio of your players and characters, PCs, but then also think about NPCs. Is your world weirdly devoid of women? Because that is something I've noticed a lot, is that people will have maybe more of a gender balanced player base and PCs, but then all the NPCs that are important are male.
All the NPCs in power are male. Yes,
yeah,
absolutely. Yeah.
And there's also, you know, there's sort of like gendered connotations to do with certain character archetypes you might want to avoid, like conniving women leaders and stuff like that, and sort of language used around women where there's often sort of a presumption that you're meant to talk about the physical appearance of women in terms of how attractive or unattractive they are. Just sort of little things like that that often people don't even think about, that can make a game feel so much more welcoming to women.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And when on the topic of NPCs, my players have pointed out that I have put more strong females than males. So that's a bias that I discovered that I don't mind as much. It is a bias I've discovered through DMing.
If I do ever get around to GMing, which maybe one day, I don't know, but I'm pretty intent on like all the important characters will be women or people of marginalized genders.
Yeah. So what about you guys? What would you say is something that as players or as a DM that you can do to help have more inclusivity or comfort within the table?
I don't know. I always, I like to use, well, I talked about this last time we had this panel, but I'll do it again for the Gulf community. So I like to use, even if I'm doing 5e, I like to use the world of Galarian from Pathfinder, because it has many, many different cultures and races built into its world. So you can find somebody that looks like you, pretty much in the world. So on the race spectrum, and then their NPCs are excellent, and I think this is part of what caused the shift and caused Wizards of the Coast to get their stuff together, and put that comment that you talked about, Safia, in 5e, was because Pathfinder was really pushing having diverse characters. The female paladin, the archetypal female paladin from Pathfinder is this awesome, fully armored black lady with cornrows. She's so cool, and stuff like that. They were really pushing that forward. We need to make the game more inclusive. We need to make these cool characters that you think are awesome, whether you're a man or a woman. They were really pushing that, and that sort of, I think, if we're talking about the history, kind of woke up Wizards of the Coast, like, oh God, we got to get moving with this because people like it, and that so my life hack for is to use Galarian, so I can use characters like that, and the country she's from, which is kind of a fantasy, East Africa, as part of the setting. So using a world that has that stuff in it, and you tell your players specifically before you start, or give them resources that show them that all of that is there. You can pick, when I just started my recent campaign, I gave them a big map of Galarian. I said, and then it had like the different cultural basis for all of the countries on it. So you can pick a character from anywhere here. Look it up, kind of check it out. So that's my fast track way to do that is to make it explicit that you can do that, because I think a lot of times people think, oh, it's medieval fantasy, they have to be white people,
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
That's true. I mean, for me, I am a big fan of Session Zero. I think it's so important. You outline the comfort zones, the kind of not so comfort zones. And I think that's a really good way of, kind of saying everything you need to say up front, so there's no surprises later on, and I think it's not just about the surprises, it's also about kind of really delving into topics that your players, regardless of whether they're male or female, would be or not be your sorry, just reading that. Okay, so would be comfortable or not comfortable with. And so, for instance, I always hear, like in the last campaign we joined in, our DM was like, okay, I'm going to have real gritty realism, etc., etc., etc. And I just made it clear, I was just like, I'm not comfortable with scenes of rape. I don't want to. It's okay if it's alluded to, but if anyone thinks they're going to sit and play this in front of me, I'm not going to be comfortable with this.
Yeah.
And he was great. He was like, no, of course I didn't mean that by gritty realism. I mean, like, like people, when they get injured, they stay injured for a week. They're not just better from having a sleep. And I was like, that's fine. But it was just, putting the cards on the table, so to say.
Yeah, I think that's really important. Even if it might seem like something's obvious, you might have gone off thinking, well, I'm sure he said gritty realism, but I'm sure he's not going to include rape. But then you might have that anxiety and worry. And I think that's a big part of creating comfort, and that Session Zero helps with it. And I think the same can be said about community management. If it were to be clear what is acceptable and unacceptable behavior, and that can really help make people feel comfortable, because their comfort has been reinforced from the beginning. And this is irrespective of gender, but it does usually tend to mean allowing more comfort for women, to state that.
Yeah,
and one of the communities that I joined that's across Saudi, Arabia 20, they have gone through a lot of efforts to make sure that there is some inclusivity and comfort across, and any behavior that is unwarranted is handled very smoothly and quickly. So that sort of thing is great both in a game setting as well as in a community management setting.
It's the ability, it's feeling that you can say if you're uncomfortable. That's what that session 0 does. Because later on, if something does come up, you know, we know this about kind of sexual harassment in the workplace, where women go and say, oh, this is what's happened, and nobody believes you, or you stay quiet because you don't want to make waves. But that session 0 basically entitles those players to say what they need to say later on if something does go awry. So yeah, session 0 really, honestly, it's such a welcoming feeling, and it's really exciting as well, of course.
I only recently had like a full-on session 0 for the quest stream I started doing a couple of months ago, and it was such a, like, I really enjoyed having that session 0 there, where we laid out not only talking about the themes we wanted to explore in the game and where we wanted our characters to go, and talking about the system because we were new to it, but also having a lines and veils sheet that we wrote together. So if anyone doesn't know, a line would be something that you absolutely don't want to be covered in a game, and a veil is something where it could be like alluded to, but then we fade to black or something. So like think of like, oh, the characters start kissing, but then we fade to black before anything sexual happens, stuff like that. And yeah, like writing a lines and veils sheet together. And so that obviously there are some things that are sort of upfront, like sexual assault and rape would always be a hard line for me. I would never want that in a game. But then there are also other things that are more, you know, unusual out there. Like, for example, I just have a really specific thing where I don't like eye gore. So I was able to say, I would rather we don't have anyone's eyes be pulled out in this game, please. Because that's not a very like obvious thing that a lot of people would think of. Whereas like sexual assault and slavery and racism are things that are very often already on those lines of veils sheets when I arrive to the table. But then there's other things people can say, like if someone has arachnophobia, for example. But all these things create a level of comfort that is very useful for marginalized people of marginalized identities.
And in fact, one of our, because I've got quite a few DMs, but one of our DMs, he's running us in Strahd, and he had actually said, okay, listen, because we're playing online, it makes it even easier. So he just said, listen, if there's anything you're uncomfortable with, can you just drop me an X? Just in the box, an X. And so I know, I'm aware, and this was for everyone, not just me, by the way. It's not like, oh, Yasmin, she's so sensitive or whatever. It's not that. It was for everyone. But basically, if you are becoming uncomfortable, put an X in. You are welcome to turn off your cam, do whatever you need to do. And so, yeah, it was very much about creating a very hospitable table, basically.
And you know, a lot of what happens within the table and what we can do, and that's within our private games, but as a lot of us touched on earlier, seeing other females play. And so as mentioned, you only saw women, you only saw men at that shop, and mostly saw men at those tables where you go and you went up to them. Maybe another woman wouldn't have. So being that woman who's at the table or who's streaming or who's representing can make a really big difference. In a Discord channel for Arabia 20, I had joined, and there were women playing, and an idea came from the community manager, Ahmed, to create just one of the channels under the Discord to say that this is a women's group and only the women can post there. It wasn't something I had thought, it was something he had thought of, and that was support from him. And just adding it in, just so that there's a single channel line saying women's group, has led to having more women active. So it's just about having that visibility. So that's something that I hope we can do, and maybe other women can also do as well. So this is talking about what we can do in our own smaller circles and our own reach, but what do you think that publishers can do, that writers can do, whether small or big, to help in the representation and inclusivity of women?
I think one big thing, which you mentioned before, is that a lot of the older books use male pronouns for all characters across the board. And that has been improved upon by having most books refer to he or she. But a big thing, obviously we are focusing on women here, but that naturally makes us talk about all marginalized genders. A big thing, I think, just use they to refer to people whose pronouns you don't know. Like if you're referring to the presumed player, just say they. It's faster, it's less letters, it's easier, and it's inclusive of everyone. And it creates a presumed level of inclusivity for women and people of marginalized genders, that they are welcome in that space. from the get-go. And I think also artwork is a big thing. There is a lot of sexualized fantasy artwork out there. It makes me cringe so hard as someone who is a costume designer and an artist to see women in boob armor and chainmail bikinis still on the front cover of books in the year of our Lord 2020. If all your artwork of female characters is highly sexualized, thin white women, then I am not going to want to play your game, frankly.
It's very off-putting.
Absolutely.
The strangest thing is my first year of university, one of my first essays was looking at hypersexualized fantasy art. And I just remember I remember even discussing this with actually NASA, just saying like, imagine I wasn't even at the role play table at that point. This is 10 years ago at university, and I was just like, this is a problem, because fantasy, I think this is part of why TTRPGs kind of developed the way they did, was fantasy was really very much considered a boys genre. It was very kind of Lord of the Rings, boys read it. The Hobbit was boys read it. But actually, I think things have improved, definitely, and they can continue to improve, and I hope they do continue to improve. But I think, like you said, it's about just moving away from that art. It is absolutely ridiculous, it's demeaning, and we know who it's for, and it's not for us.
Absolutely. And because D&D especially, but the fantasy genre as a whole draws so much from Tolkien and those other early fantasy authors and comics and books. And so those issues of sexism and racism that were so prevalent in Tolkien and the surrounding media have been just entirely transposed into D&D. And it's taken a lot of time to unwork them and try to begin digging them out of there, and it's still not fully done. There's still huge issues left over from those exact sort of Tolkien influences there. It is starting to happen, but when we can shift away from the presumption being that if a woman is present, she must be sexualized, she must be white, she must be thin, she must be beautiful, that's when
or the victim
and also the subject but not the object but not the protagonist, which is what happens when you use all male pronouns, is you make the players and GMs believe that men are the protagonists and women can only be there as NPCs and subjects, usually to be saved or whatever. So once we start to move away from that, that's when women start to feel more comfortable, and that's when we can start to unpack the more sort of deep down issues as well.
The more nuanced kind of issues that we forget about.
That's what I noticed about that picture.
Woo!
Imagine if you were carrying a big sword around, you'd have to be wearing gloves, probably.
The banner image for the panel was very good. I appreciated that the room was wearing proper armor. Thank you.
There's a whole series of Pinterest boards that are sensible armor for women.
It's funny because you have to have the word sensible.
So it's just proves that you can have awesome, badass art, and the women are even still beautiful if you want them to be.
There has been a huge shift in artwork, at least from the artwork that I'm able to see and consume, as before it was only what's published, to what now is being posted on Twitter from artists that are tired of this trope and are creating new content. And so it's very nice to see that. But maybe I'm greedy, but I think that there's room to have so much more, so much more representation and different ethnicities, different types of women, different body types. And I mean, this carries over from everything, from the fashion industry to any other art industry. So it spills over into tabletop role playing and into writing. Even in a number of video games, you could think of a couple of ones that all the NPCs are rather voluptuous women.
They only have one body model. That's always your excuse, right?
It's too hard to animate another one.
Well, what's been quite exciting for me is this appearance now of hijabi fantasy
Yeah.
characters, where it's
Yeah.
just like the people that look like me are absent completely. Yes, okay, they're women, it's great, but we are absent. There are no hijabi women. If we're there, we are victims, whether it's in major media like Hollywood or wherever. And so that's been so exciting for me, just kind of actually looking at artwork, but actually, oh my gosh, is that a Muslim woman wearing a headscarf actually present? Like, oh my goodness. So for me the next thing would be to see on Twitch streams. I've never seen yet on a Twitch stream or YouTube like an actual hijabi role player, but I'm looking forward to waiting and watching and seeing it happen.
It should be you.
No, not me, but I get too embarrassed. But it's so exciting. I mean, I came across another hijabi. I know this sounds very reductive. It's just I've not met anyone yet. But another
not at all reductive.
Role player on Twitter, and I just messaged her and I was like, oh my gosh, this is so exciting. And she probably just thought I was a lunatic. I can't believe you play D&D. She's probably just like, all my friends are hijabis, you're just a weirdo. But for me, it was so exciting.
But no, it's such a big deal because
it's really
it can
cool.
often feel like people of different like marginalized identities are so few and far between. Like I remember when I found that I'm part of the like Asians Represent Critical Read Al-Qadim podcast, and when I found Asians Represent the podcast, I was just like, oh my god, it's a podcast all about Asian people.
Yes.
And yeah, like there's East Asians and there's South Asians and there's Middle Easterns, there's like everyone, but like this is like I found a community that I can be part of. And it's like it is such a big deal.
It is. And I don't think people realize like that feeling, that kind of rush that comes when you're just like, oh my gosh, there's somebody else out there. I'm not just this person by myself. Like, oh, it's just so exciting. It's so exciting.
Yeah. I actually remember the first time I saw a hijabi cosplayer in the Dubai Comic Con.
Yeah.
And her costume was amazing. It was something from Kingdom Hearts. I don't remember what it was. It was a few years back, but I just remember her and how fantastic she looked that I just ran up to her. I'm like, oh my god, I love your costume when you made this. It looks amazing. I was fangirling with her, and she was jumping up and I was like, I know.
Yeah, there's some amazing hijabi cosplay.
I dressed up as Little Red Riding Hood a few years ago for World Book Day. And so I had a hood and everything like that. And so I bought 2 yellow pashmina scarves and plaited them basically. And I remember the kids at school, just their mind, it was like it opened their minds. They were just like, oh, hold on. So if I wear hijab, I can actually dress up and I can do cosplay and I can. And so it's creating those moments of I can, I can do that. I'm not left out. It's not something I have to enjoy from afar. I can actually participate. And it was so lovely the year after, even our hijabi girls who never used to dress up on World Book Day suddenly felt that actually I can style my scarf in a certain way that makes it look like hair or helps me kind of bring that character out. So yeah, that I can, it's so important.
Yeah. And as mentioned, you feel like it's something so simple and so obvious because there's no big sign telling you can't, but oftentimes we need a big sign telling us you can, and the simplest way is seeing someone similar. And when it comes to art and representing different ethnicities, I do like to use art for my private games where I would say, okay, this is how this NPC looks like. And I often find that when I'm trying to find a specific ethnicity, I end up trying to type it in, and it quickly leads me to all of the other ethnicities, as if they're all tagged under ethnic, non-ethnic, which makes no sense. So definitely we need a lot more of this, whether artists or writers or so on, and it'll be a big part of representation as well. And if anyone here wants to ask any questions, please type them in the Q&A, and we'll be able to answer them as part of our chat. So we did touch on a few personal experiences, but do you have any ones that are more funny, even if a little bit sexist, but in the end, funny experiences about playing in this tabletop role-playing game? One experience I have was at one convention. I went up to the books and the dice, and I was planning on buying a bit of dice for some of my community members. And the first response I got from the person working there was, "Oh, do you know what those are for?" I said, "Yeah, I've been looking to buy it for my community that I run." And they're like, "Okay." They probably meant well, but still. If you think of anything related to this, feel free to pipe it in at any point. And one thing I had read about, and perhaps Kirsten, you could shed some light on it regarding Warhammer, but some people have posted saying that a lot of the perception that D&D is masculine has carried over from some older games such as Warhammer and others. So if you're aware of any other games and how they've evolved, because I know we've talked a lot about D&D, but this is all about general tabletop role playing. So have you seen a similar or better evolution across other games that you've experienced?
I ran a vampire game for quite a while, and my experience has always been way more women play vampire than men. So I know, and I was at when I was in college, I was in my black trench coat at the LARP, the vampire LARP. There were a lot more men there, I think, but as soon as I started writing, well, all three of us started out writing. So that tells you, I encountered many, many more women than men in that, at least. So when you start getting into writing, and I think certain types of games that are a lot more narrative heavy, a lot less dice rolling, you run into more women. I can't say that that's the experience for everyone everywhere, just what I've noticed as I've been doing that since I was 12. A lot of really cool women are playing vampire.
Yeah, I'm hoping to be able to join one day. So we have one question in the Q&A. I've seen male authors and DMs be unable to write and play convincing women, and unfortunately revert to not including women in their worlds and stories. What alternatives, if you can't write good women characters, would you do to keep including them?
Just include them as human beings in the same.
Yeah, like I worry that have to be women.
Yeah, I worry that people get like way too caught up in the idea of like it's a woman character. Like, write a character, write a compelling character, and then switch the gender. And
that's a good way.
That at first, then you'll realize quickly that unless you are telling a story where that character's gender is for some reason an important part of that story, like if you're in a historical setting or something, but generally in RPGs, I feel like it's a power fantasy game, you want to move away from that kind of stuff. You'll quickly realize that it's not that much different and difficult to write a female character or, a character of color as opposed to a white character or so on and so forth. They're just characters like any other character.
I think that's a great strategy, the idea that just build your character and then just switch the gender. And so I think that's a great and a really easy strategy to kind of do. And I think Isa mentioned something earlier where she said, like, don't spend too much time on the way she looks. If you wouldn't do that for a male character, basically. So, if you're going to describe the armor, that's normal. You would have done that for both because maybe the armor is from a particular group or they represent a certain house or king or whatever. But if it's like, that kind of typical trope of kind of like that she wore super tight jeans,
the soft silky hair, and
she looked at herself in the mirror.
And you're not going to do that for your male characters, or your male characters aren't looking whimsically from the windows. Just don't do it, basically. So that is your best strategy, I'd say.
I remember seeing. Oh, sorry. Continue.
No, please go on.
I just remember, like, I've watched a lot of sort of like various YouTube channels about playing D&D and GMing D&D and stuff like that, and I remember coming across this channel, and generally I enjoyed the content, but he had all these, it was a man, he had all these videos about like how to play a female character in D&D or whatever it was, and seemed to just sort of like put all this emphasis on playing a female character being any different from playing a male character, down to like, and we're not talking, you know, in a historical setting women were persecuted at this time or something like that. We're talking like women think differently than men, and down to that sort of like really, really bad biology argument, and just try to do away with all of that and just write them as characters, honestly. Like the gender switching thing I suggested, if I'm remembering correctly, I think I heard about that from when they were writing Alien, and the main actor was originally male, and they just cast a female actor in the role and didn't really change anything other than that. And that is such an iconic character that people remember to this day, because she was written so differently from how women were written in film in general at the time.
I think one of my favorite responses to this question was to someone asked this to George R. R. Martin, saying that you write female characters, so where's your inspiration for that? And he just pauses like, well, I see women in my life, they're people, so I write about them.
Just female characters are that good though, personally, but that's me.
I think it's a great question anyway, just because there is an anxiety that kind of surrounds it, and I think I'd like to think it comes from a well-intentioned place as well, where it's actually, I feel anxious because I don't want to offend, and I like that, and I think that kind of introspectiveness is great. So I'm sorry if we're laughing too much about it, but I think obviously for us where we're sitting, we're just like, we're humans too, and
it is definitely like, I think it's a healthier approach to at least think about ways in which the women you're writing could end up being like a harmful depiction, and as much as we're saying yes, write them as characters, like I mentioned earlier, there are some harmful tropes set within fantasy surrounding women that you should probably avoid. Usually tropes that sexualize and demonize women. And, you know, those are things you can read up on. There are books about them. There are YouTube videos you can go and watch about them. But I think ultimately the best place to start is just not trying to create too much of a differential in your head and getting too wrapped up in the idea of it being a woman character or a POC character or whatever.
One thing that I like to implement in my games that I did recently, because I did feel like my NPCs were getting a little bit kind of the same. Like I felt like I was repeating NPCs. I felt like I was running out of ideas. So I started keeping a log of all the NPCs with very general descriptions, gender, what ethnicity they're meant to portray, because I'm not really focused on it. It's just that a matter of, this is what this person looks like and talks like, rather than this person is Hispanic or so on, because it's a fantasy setting. And so I'd log all that just so I can kind of be aware of any existing biases I might have, because as you said, it's quite easy to lean into, this is a medieval white character. So this kind of keeps me from staying away from it, so that the next time I create, I can quickly sort and see, oh, this is the 10th character I've made of this. Let's do something else. Especially when you're DMing a long campaign. So I found that started helping me.
Yeah, I guess also, like, if you're a GM creating a lot of NPCs, I imagine something useful could be, if you think about a character you really love from something else and sort of use them as a basis to jump off of, like, I don't know, just think about like your favorite TV show you're watching right now and think about a female character who you really enjoy in that and think is well written, and then maybe use that as a starting point. That could also help maybe, and think about why that character is so appealing and well written as well, and like what sort of good structures are in place to make those characters appealing.
And we do have a second question. Do you feel there are any specific shifts you've experienced from when you started tabletop roleplay games to where you're involved now? Prejudices that were the norm that are a strange concept to the old and new gamers, or something that has made progress but might still need some development? So in my experience, honestly, I have seen some improvements, as mentioned, in the art and in finding more female characters, and in being able to create as freely as I'd like as a DM, and finding more women to play with. But it hasn't ever felt like something that changed before my eyes, to be very frank. It felt like something that has just taken years and developed along with the world, rather than a push from tabletop role-playing or from community members as much. Then again, I've only been playing for a few years. What's your take on it?
Well, I'll jump in. So back in the day, the old days of Yahoo Chat, where people used to role play in text form, then I feel like an old lady, honestly. Back then, it was actually a very, very strong community, and it was great. And then in the end, it kind of disbanded slowly because it was just a bunch of harassment, really. Actually, people jumping into your DMs, wanting to role play, but not the type of role play we're talking about right here, right? So what happened was it kind of destroyed the vibe, and for me, I just left. I was like, I'm just not, even though I was so young, I just was not interested in that type of thing. And I think really, if I'm honest, over the years, kind of coming back and forth and going and this and that, I have been impressed with, and I can't speak for everybody, but I will speak just from my own experience here, the kind of sensitivity in which people are approaching their tables now. I play in a mixed group, so I don't play just with all females or males. But that for me has been kind of the most, I don't want to say woke, because that is just like the worst word ever. But I feel like a shift that I'm seeing is definitely more sensitivity. It's not perfect, obviously, but there is a lot more sensitivity kind of coming to the table now and being brought to the table by males and females, in my experience. I can't talk wider than that, I'm afraid.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I'm sure that, there's still improvements to be made, but as someone who's dipped in and out a couple of times in like big years-long gaps, I can definitely see a difference in what you're describing. Because I've always been into video games, I could maybe talk about like shifts I've seen actively happening in that more accurately. And from what I've seen, from the amount of times I've dipped in and out of tabletop gaming, it feels as though those shifts I've seen in the video game community have sort of been echoed in that community as well. Like, for example, I remember when I was, 17, 18, going to like video game conventions, like not general, MCM kind of conventions, but like specifically for gaming. I was very often the only girl in the room. And, I would walk into a room with my male friends and they would be uncomfortable about how all the male eyes in the room would just turn to me. And it was, and then going to gaming conventions now, like in the last couple of years, it's been very, very different. That they're more family oriented, there's more women there, that's more inclusive in general. And as I've dipped in and out of the tabletop gaming community, I feel like I've seen that shift be present as well, but I can't speak to having seen it happen myself. And I feel like there's maybe less of the sort of nonsense that put me off at the start, like stuff like assumptions that if you're a girl, you have to play a healer, which happen in video games and in tabletop games. Which is why I don't play clerics. Sorry.
I love clerics, but I play a different type of cleric.
But yeah, just these sort of like very prescriptive attitudes that really put me off, of being like, well, we'll let you play, but it has to be on our terms. So you have to play something that's feminine and nurturing and all that kind of nonsense.
It goes back to the gatekeeping you were talking about.
Yeah, exactly. It's an element of that, and it also comes from that, the presumption that the warriors must be male because this comes from a war game. It was like D&D was based on a war game. So it's like, we can allow women in, but they have to fulfill the nursing role.
Yeah. Well, no, the joke is when they turn around and go, yes, but historically men went to war, and it's like, we're playing a fantasy game. Get over it. Okay?
We're fighting dragons. We're fighting dragons and goblins. Did those exist in history?
Yeah.
Also, there were female warriors in history. Like,
yes.
I'll educate you on this.
I love when suddenly the realism has to kick in. Just when it suits someone. So,
we care about
like
realism when there are women and POC existing. We don't care about realism when you're fighting a dragon on the bow of an airship, you know.
Like it's
shooting fire from your hands.
Yeah, like it's fine to find loot inside the wolf, but a woman warrior, no, that's a little bit unrealistic.
Boudica clearly never existed, you know.
Yes, exactly. No, that always gets my goat, that one, where they're just like, yes, I know, but this is based on Roman Britain. There wouldn't have been black people here. And you're like, I don't care, being a fantasy game. Imagine there are, okay, whatever. And actually,
go and watch David Olusoga's documentary, Black Britain.
Exactly. Do some research about historical Roman Britain. It's very different what people
really interesting. So interesting.
Yeah. The great book called Black and British, just saying. Okay.
Oh yeah.
Moving on.
But yeah, I do feel as though I've seen that prescriptiveness somewhat erode away over time. I'm sure there's still people who do it. I've still encountered people who do it, but like it seems to be less the prevailing opinion, and it feels as though there has been a shift to trying, generally speaking, to make this a more inclusive space for everyone.
Yeah.
The thing I would say, kind of as a completely different tack to that question, is the thing I've seen is the gamers I play with, maybe this is only true of my experience, but I don't know, but has gone way more from tactical to narrative. And I think that's to do with you know, the different streaming shows that show what a great story it can be. And I think a lot more people who are more interested in that are playing now. So you know, my game, they have to remind me to be quiet while they're RPing, because I'm used to like, okay, we got to push it along. I'm the GM, they're going to get bored. And they're like, we're RPing, shut up.
The GM doesn't talk in this session, only we talk now.
That is so true. So true. There is a real focus now in newer players, especially. They really want the role play element. That's rather than just kill the goblin. Okay, next one, let's kill the orc. Oh, next one, let's kill, you know. So
I think actually that was a big part of what sort of got me finally hooked, was finding people and realizing that the community was embracing of much more narrative driven games where we were sort of examining these tropes of fantasy genre as well. Because like, you know, I have a huge issue with, we just kill the goblins because they're goblins. Like, to me, I wouldn't. I'll kill a goblin if it's doing something I don't agree with, but I'm not going to kill a goblin.
But what if our PCs is a goblin? What are we doing?
And really like being able to sort of like make characters where you could explore different themes and have connections with your friends using those characters as the conduit for that was one of the things that really got me sort of hooked into it finally. I do enjoy the tactical combat stuff as well. I'm super into it when I'm in the mood, but I don't want it to be the only reason I'm there.
Like, I want something to be, I like it to be more psychological. So that's kind of, I agree with you. Like, I love the whole blasting. If it's just 3, 4, 5, 6 hours of just pure role play, I want to blast something. Like, I'm sorry, like,
I want a mixture. I want to have a deep emotional talk about all our characters' feelings for 2 hours, and then I want to go and slay the Hydra.
Meanwhile, the GM sitting there like,
and then after the fight, we talk about how it made us feel.
Just a therapy session. That's what we're asking for, okay? With some violence. That's all we want.
Projecting onto your D&D characters? What? Never heard of that.
And I think that transitions to narrative, as you're talking about, helps in representation of anyone, whether it's different races, so that you're not pinholing them into evil or good, or women or POC or so on. So that shift towards narrative makes you sit and create a character, both as a player and as a DM, so that instead you're creating these real live people, and it gives you all this emotion to sink into. So just before we wrap up this wonderful discussion, although I'm sad to wrap it up, to be honest.
I know.
But have you experienced anything within your games that has helped you explore your own feminism and maybe highlight any of your own existing biases towards it?
It always makes me laugh, just because I mentioned it to you earlier, didn't I, Saf, that I tend to play very repressed women, which is the antithesis of me, basically, because I am just boisterous and loud. And so it's very interesting. I mean, my Curse of Strahd character is very, very prim and proper, Victorian-esque woman, corseted, booted, and, you know, she'll say things like, we're women, we shouldn't behave this way. And I find that really interesting, that of all the people who has decided to play this character, it is me. But now she seems to be morphing into some sort of crazy suffragette. Not crazy because she's a woman, crazy because she just gets angry. Like, she's an angry lady. And so she seems to be morphing into this suffragette. And I've not explored it enough within myself. Like, why do I play, in general, quite frosty characters, quite cold, frosty, I'd say frosty female characters, whilst my male characters are very interesting in that they're basically a bunch of Cantabrigian like areas. So it's really interesting. I don't know why I've got this weird internal bias where I'm extremely kind of boisterous and warm and I love everybody to death and it's fine, but I have very grumpy women.
Just getting out all that frustration.
Yeah, clearly I think so.
I've noticed that with me, I struggle to roleplay out a weak female NPC.
Yeah,
so it's like
I think that's why they're all grumpy.
The grump is the strength.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I do find it hard to put a damsel in distress, even if, you know, it's a small minor NPC and I'm not really playing up that all she is a damsel in distress. She just so happens to be a woman that needs help. And I do find that difficult. I often always end up creating a man that needs help, not a woman. So I think that's me rebelling against it. And, you know, it's a small thing, but it's one thing that I've noticed. And I'm just for sake of narration, sake of varying all genders, trying to work through that and be aware of it. And of course, trying to write maybe more interesting men, because I have written a lot of interesting women that my players have even said, so where are the strong men?
Yeah, balancing, isn't it? It's about creating balance.
Yeah. I think for me, something I've found really valuable in finally sort of like getting into tabletop gaming in a big way is that basically I realized I've been creating all the female characters I wish I'd been able to like watch a TV show or a movie about, or play a game about, or read a book about, or see a play about, like my whole life. Because not saying that there aren't brilliant female characters out there, but generally speaking, women characters don't get to be the protagonist. They don't get to be the character whose head we get inside and mentality we understand. They don't get to be as complex. And so I basically realized I've been creating all these characters I've wanted to see like my whole life. Like all my characters are female or use female pronouns, even the robots, of which there are a lot because I love them. So I'm like super into Transformers.
Yeah.
99.9% of them are male. There's an actual statistic there. It's not quite that, but like the assumption within that sort of fiction is that the default is male. And I was always like, where are the female robots?
Why?
When there are female robots, why are they pink and flimsy? So I've made, 2 Warforged characters, and I'm now about to start playing a Peacecraft in Burn Bright, all female pronouns, all cool, badass robots who don't have to be pink and flimsy in order to be female robots. Don't have to justify the fact that they're female. And so, yeah, I find myself playing, I mean, I guess they would be described as strong female characters, although sometimes that can be a bit of a like misleading term, but like, I just enjoy being able to create female characters who are complex and are driving the action forward with what they do, and who get to I get to explore everything about them. Like from my storm sorcerer who doesn't know like where she came from to like my Goliath paladin who worships Dionysus and just goes out giving free wine to everyone. Like those are the kind of female characters I feel like you wouldn't usually get. Like usually a lot of the characters I make, I realize like usually a lot of them would tend to be male with the kind of personalities and backstories and abilities that they have. And it's something I really enjoy, being able to get to not only see, but like be that character as a woman. And then when you're streaming, people get to see it and experience it as well, which is really nice when you get feedback saying like, I really enjoyed this character you made.
I think I've always played mixed characters, but one thing, the last character I played before he tragically died was Van Gogh, the turtle monk. And I got really, really upset at the table one day because people kept calling him her. And I'm like, it's a male character. He has always been a male character. Why can't that stick in your head? Because I'm a woman, my character's not a woman. Right. And I had a whole big rant. I don't know if that's feminism exactly, but related to the issue, it's like, I can play whatever I want. It's a fantasy game. He's a turtle, for God's sake.
Yeah.
Well, a couple of Strahd games, well, her name is Maggie May, my Victorian character, and she went on a rant because basically there was this man trying to stake this dead woman, and she just died from not natural causes. She had tuberculosis.
Strahd, no.
And basically this prim and proper lady who's kind of trying to kind of maintain the patriarchy, very much so. I know, odd. I don't know what's happened to me. Okay, I don't know what's happened, but there we go. This is her role in the thing. Suddenly just goes nuts about this kind of, why do men do this? Why are women always in suspicion even when they're dead? Blah blah blah. You just want to stake her because she may come back and blah blah. And I just remember the DM just going, that was just so great. I just really enjoyed it. And I was like, oh, even when I'm trying to kind of keep that feminism in, always going to be there because it is just so part of who I am. It is integral to my personality. And this character, I just can't play any other characters. They just have to be. They will always end up being strong, hardcore, grumpy women. No matter how hard I try.
I feel like all your characters would get along really well with the character I'm playing in my quest stream right now.
Oh, really?
She's an invoker, which is basically that game's equivalent of a paladin. And she is very big, very muscly, quite grumpy. She tries really, really hard to not be grumpy, but it's just like, no, I'm not taking shit from anyone.
Exactly. I love it. My level 20, yes, guys, I survived to level 20, guys. My level 20 warlock, she started off as a neutral character. She then cut off, it was for Avernus, she cut off her own hand and put the hand of Vecna on her arm and became evil. Yes, I know.
Wow.
And she's one of my absolute favorite characters. And what was interesting was what was explored. Basically, the premise of her character was she was a smuggler and she was caught and died. So when I took her on as a character, she had already been resurrected by a necromancer, was being used as like a golem, basically. And so she was just doing tasks, and then basically the patron comes and says, I can break you free of this. You need to become a warlock and sign it away. And so that's what happened. What happened was we went through the whole of Avernus. So you've got the character who's quite dazed and confused most of the time. She then gets stronger. She then decides she loves power. Now, by the end, there was a moment where, and this is just a very key moment that I remembered, where basically I say she, like she's different to me. She's opposite. She is her own person. Where basically she talked about the lack of power and what lack of power does to people. And the reason why basically she's ended up taking this course of action of kind of cutting off her own hand and becoming powerful and putting that first and foremost was because of having not had any power. And I think, that is probably what we're seeing in our characters is this kind of rejection of centuries of a lack of power and now being like, we're taking all the power back now, people.
Yes, and I think that's what's really great about tabletop role playing is that you can put yourself in a situation where maybe you'd react in a way you wish you could, or in a way you feel like you should be able to, but perhaps can't in your daily life for any reason. Maybe you can't be as grumpy as you'd like.
She's a mom. She can be as grumpy as she wants.
I too wish that I could react to situations by blasting people with a ball of lightning.
Yes. It would solve a lot of problems, create more, but solve a lot of them.
Yeah.
Now we have a different problem.
Exactly. Well, I really enjoyed this talk so much. Thank you all for all your wonderful views. Just a reminder for everyone, if you don't already know, we do have a wonderful panel tomorrow, which is how to run a horror game, and it's at 7 p.m. UAE time and 3 p.m. GMT. And the panelists have game designers from Call of Cthulhu, Black Void, Chivalry and Sorcery, Valdekan, and more. So sign up for that if you haven't. And thank you everyone for joining, for listening in, and most importantly, thank you for all that time.
Thanks everyone.
Thanks.
Thanks for
Thanks
watching.
panelists. Very welcome.